If you've been on any social media platforms over the past few days and have been looking up anything related to the new Superman movie, you may have noticed some viral posts from leftists and anti Zionists claiming that Superman 2025 is a film with the essential quality of saying F you to Israel and Zionism. Now, I'm not here to debate whether or not Moravia and Jaranpur are actually metaphors for Israel and Palestine. The script was completed before October 7th, 2023. Moravia is clearly meant to be a Slavic country, while Jaranpur evokes the Indian subcontinent more than the Middle East. Frankly, the world building of the whole conflict is a little confused, and I suspect deliberately so. It's a geopolitical Rorschach blot. Whatever conflict you see in it probably says more about you than about the film. Gunn muddied the waters by making Moravia US aligned, but there are plenty of US aligned authoritarian regimes that are and have been involved in conflicts with weaker neighbors. And Israel is a democracy. As presented in the movie, tin pot dictator Vasil Gurkos is motivated by greed, ego, and a supervillain's love of death and conquest for its own sake. He wants Jaranpur's oil reserves and will enjoy the genocidal process of obtaining them. At no point does he express any kind of ethnic hatred for Jaranpuris or any kind of ideology whatsoever. In light of this, I do understand why anti Zionists are so certain that the conflict is meant to reflect Israel Palestine. In their mind, Israel is comprised of a bunch of Eastern European colonizers in a region they believe is, quote, brown, is functionally a cartoonishly evil tin pot dictatorship, and the actual circumstances that precipitated the war in Gaza, namely the October 7th attacks, are completely irrelevant. They understand that Zionism is an ideology, but often believe the content of that ideology is essentially cartoonish evil for its own sake. So, the fictional tin pot dictatorship of Moravia is exactly how Israel appears in their mental framework, regardless of how much that framework reflects reality. It's like someone reached into their brains, took out the Israel of their imaginations, and put it on the big screen, only renamed as Moravia for plausible deniability. What this video is really about is not whether or not their interpretive framework of the Israel-Palestine conflict is correct. Rather, for the purpose of intellectual exercise, I'm going to assume that it is, and analyze what the film is trying to say through that framework. They don't just claim that Moravia is Israel and Jaranpur is Palestine, after all. They also claim that the film is anti-Zionist in its messaging. And this is the part that really gives me pause. To understand why, I must first explain what anti-Zionism means. Anti-Zionism is not simply the belief that Israel is in the wrong in the Gaza war, or that it's committing genocide, or that its occupation and settlement of the West Bank is wrong, or that its government is bad, or that the United States should stop giving it military aid or selling it weapons. No. Anti-Zionism is the belief that Israel's fundamental existence as a Jewish majority state is immoral, and that it must cease to exist, replaced in its entirety by an Arab majority state called Palestine. Anti-Zionists exist on a spectrum of extremism. On the left extreme end, you have your left liberal and moderate leftist types, who believe that Israel should be dismantled and replaced with a single democratic state called Palestine. In this formulation, nobody would be forcibly displaced, and it would not devolve into an ethnic civil war because, honestly, they don't really have an answer for that one. But, leaving aside whether or not this vision for a, quote, free Palestine is practically feasible, sustainable, or even something that Palestinians are asking for, it is, at least, not advocating for ethnic cleansing or genocide. On the more extreme end, however, think your Maoists, Tankies, Islamists, Pan-Arabists, etc., ethnic cleansing of, quote, Jewish settlers is a prerequisite for a, quote, free Palestine. And to be clear, they mean millions of Israeli Jews being displaced to other countries, not just West Bank settlers. And some go a step further, advocating for outright genocide. What all of them agree on, however, is that the issue with Israel isn't just the regime or an isolated event. It is the very system represented by the State of Israel, and in more extreme cases, the majority of Israel's citizens, excluding the 20% who are ethnically Palestinian, of course. Now, what exactly is Zionism? Well, if anti Zionism is the belief that Israel must be dismantled as a Jewish majority state and replaced with an Arab majority state called Palestine, that gives you some idea. Zionism is the belief that Israel should continue to exist as a Jewish majority state. However, Zionism also exists on a spectrum. There are a minority of extreme Zionists who want Israel to annex the West Bank and Gaza and deport all the Palestinians living there to other countries. Basically, the mirror image of extreme anti Zionists. But what about the left leaning Zionists? This brings us back to the title of the video: Liberal Zionism. Liberal Zionism asserts that the existence of Israel as a majority Jewish state is acceptable, and that the only real and just solution to the conflict is two states: one Jewish majority, one Palestinian majority, living side by side in peace. Liberal Zionists are often highly critical of the Israeli government, especially right-wing Israeli governments, and often put the primary or even entire blame for a lack of a peaceful resolution on Israel itself, as the more powerful party in the conflict. Liberal Zionists will even often agree that the war in Gaza is a genocide that has to stop, but they reject the notion that Israel's mere existence is genocidal or immoral. Liberal Zionists tend to downplay bottom-up ethnic tensions between Israeli Jews and Palestinians that contribute to the conflict's intractability, instead placing the blame entirely on leadership. Nobody hates Benjamin Netanyahu more than a liberal Zionist. So, with these definitions in mind, if we accept the metaphorical framework of Israel-Palestine within this film, does it actually advocate for anti-Zionism? Because criticism of Israel is, as we've established, not the same as anti-Zionism. In order to answer this, we can't just go by aesthetics or vibes. We have to examine the themes of what actually happens on screen. So, let's summarize how the film handles the Baravian subplot. Canonically, Superman incurs 0 casualties as a result of his intervention during Baravia's invasion of Jaranpur. In other words, he doesn't kill any Baravian soldiers, nor does he arrest any of them. In fact, the only person he targets for threats is the dictator of Baravia, Vasil Gurkos, though again, he doesn't actually arrest him or anything. During his interview with Lois, Superman lays out the ideological foundation of these actions. He can't just let people die when he's able to prevent it. He doesn't buy Vasil Gurkos' rationalizations for the invasion, but this is ultimately beside the point. What the film is very careful to emphasize is Superman's total respect for the sanctity of life. All life, from the smallest kitten to the biggest kaiju. At no point does Superman, or any other character for that matter, express that the issue is Baravia existing as a system or as a state. The very clear villain in this formulation is Vasil Gurkos himself, and his collaborator Lex Luthor, not Baravia as a whole. When the Justice Gang intervenes later, with the patronage of an American billionaire, they do use violence against the Baravian soldiers, but it's cartoony, bloodless carnage, without any confirmed kills. Ultimately, the resolution of this narrative conflict is Hawkgirl's assassination of Vasil Gurkos. But Baravia is not dismantled and certainly not replaced by Crater Jaranpur. So, is this an anti-Zionist message? No, it's not even an F Israel message. If we accept the framework as argued, then it's an F Netanyahu message. That is, liberal Zionism through and through. To summarize the geopolitical themes of Superman 2025, based only on what actually happens in the film: war is bad, killing is bad, evil leaders and other powerful people are bad. Ergo, the way to resolve the Baravia-Jaranpur conflict is a two-state solution, where both sides are demilitarized, and a path of minimal harm is the evil leader being assassinated, and maybe some Baravian soldiers getting tossed around bloodlessly like Team Rocket. This is textbook if edgy liberal Zionism, meaning that if Moravia is indeed a stand in for Israel as these people believe, then Superman 2025 has a liberal Zionist theme. But what about Superman himself? After all, it's not Superman who resolves the plot in Moravia, it's the Justice Gang. Well, Superman would have handled it differently. It's not really a mystery. If it was up to Superman, there would be no soldiers flying around, and certainly no assassination of Vasil Gurkos. But maybe he would arrest him. In other words, according to Superman's no killing under any circumstances ever rule, he is morally stuck in the liberal Zionist position. Because any other resolution to the conflict requires deadly violence. Even if Superman believed that Moravia should cease to exist, and there is no textual evidence of this whatsoever, there is simply no way to dismantle a state without killing a whole lot of people. Superman, if properly aligned with his canonical morality, must by definition be a liberal Zionist. The loudest voices celebrating the movie as a blow against Israel or Zionism are frankly watching the movie with their brains turned fully off. There are admittedly some leftist and anti-Zionist critics pointing out the same thing as me, but they're being completely drowned out by the tidal wave of online triumphalism and gloating. For the past week, the social media discourse from anti-Zionists has been almost universally jubilant, with anyone from their own side arguing that the film doesn't actually support their politics being promptly ignored or dismissed. In the end, most of this discourse isn't really about the film's politics at all, but about the dopamine hit of seeing a massive cultural icon seem to validate your side. All it takes to get people excited is some gifs of Guy Gardner making middle finger constructs while sending tanks flying. For the internet, vibes and aesthetics always win out over substance. And that's how you end up with anti-Zionists cheering for a Superman movie that doesn't validate their position in any way, and for a Superman who would have certainly intervened to stop the October 7th attacks and help to rescue the Israeli hostages. In essence, they're cheering on liberal Zionism to own the Zionists. Now, there is a silver lining to all this. It means a bunch of very gullible, squishy-brained anti-Zionists are probably going to actually pay to see this movie, which means the foundational cinematic entry of the DCU, a project I've been looking forward to for many years, might get a modest boost at the box office, especially in countries where a majority of the population is anti-Zionist like Indonesia and Malaysia. So, you know what? Keep up the hype, guys. Your hilariously misguided viral posts will help us finally get the DC movie universe that we deserve.